Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We are beginning a new book in Torah. We are beginning Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. So we begin with chapter 1 at verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this point, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We'll read through our English translation. I'll share with you a focused study of our portion, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. Book of Leviticus, chapter 1, verse 1. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to Adonai, shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock." Richard, would you like to read a little bit there at verse 3?
Thank you. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before the Lord. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable in his behalf, in expiation for him. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron the priest shall put the fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water, and the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering and offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Thank you. Sherry, would you like to read at verse 10?
Thank you. If his offering for a burnt offering is from the flock of sheep or of goats, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. It shall be slaughtered before the Lord on the north side of the altar, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. When it has been cut up into sections, the priest shall lay them out with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. The entrails and the legs shall be washed with water. The priest shall offer up and turn the whole into smoke on the altar. It is a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Thank you so much. Steve, you want to read there at verse 14 of chapter 1?
If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds. Oh, I can't read that.
Okay. All right. Tony, would you like to read a little bit there, verse 14, to start there?
Yes, thank you. If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, he shall choose his offering from turtle doves or pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, pinch off its head, and turn it into smoke on the altar, and its blood shall be drained out against the side of the altar. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it into the place of the ashes at the east side of the altar. The priest shall tear it open by its wings without severing it, and turn it into smoke on the altar upon the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai.
Thank you. Anna, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 2?
Thank you. When a person presents an offering of meal to Adonai, the offering shall be of, what does say Yud Hey Vav Hey there, not Adonai. Adonai means Lord, and I want to say Yud Hey Vav Hey. The offering shall be of choice flour. The offerer shall pour oil upon it, lay frankincense on it, and present it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest shall scoop out of it a handful of its choice flour and oil, as well as all of its frankincense. And this token portion he shall turn into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's offerings by fire. When you present an offering of meal baked in the oven, it shall be of choice flour, unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. If your offering is a meal offering on a griddle, it shall be of choice flour with oil mixed in, unleavened. Break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a meal offering. If your offering is a meal offering in a pan, it shall be made of choice flour in oil.
Thank you so much. Margot, would you like to read a little bit at verse 8 of chapter 2?
Thank you. When you present to the Lord a meal offering that is made in any of these ways, it shall be brought to the priest, who shall take it up to the altar. The priest shall remove the token portion from the meal offering and turn it into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from the Lord's offering by fire. No meal offering that you offer to the Lord shall be made from leaven, for no leaven or honey may be turned into smoke as an offering by fire to the Lord. You may bring them to the Lord as an offering of choice products. But they shall be offered up on the altar for a pleasing odor. You shall season your every offering of meal with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering the salt of your covenant with God. With all of your offerings, you must offer salt.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Let me offer up Mark Thompson, if you'd like to start at verse 14 and continue into the beginning of chapter 3.
Okay, thanks. If you bring a meal offering of its first fruits to Adonai, you shall bring new ears parched with fire, grits of the fresh grain as your meal offering of first fruits. You shall add oil to it and lay frankincense on it. It is a meal offering. And the priest shall turn a token portion of it into smoke, some of the grits and oil, with all of the frankincense, as an offering by fire to Adonai. If his offering is a sacrifice of well-being, if he offers of the herd, whether a male or a female, he shall bring before Adonai one without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash the blood against all sides of the altar. He shall then present from the sacrifice of well-being as an offering by fire to Adonai the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, the two kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. Aaron's sons shall turn these into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering, which is upon the wood that is on the fire, as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai.
Thank you so much, Mark. And now, Paul, would you like to read a little bit starting there at verse 6?
Thank you, Rabbi. If his offering to Hashem is a peace offering from the flock, male or female, unblemished, shall he offer it. If he offers a sheep as his offering, he shall bring it before Hashem. He shall lean his hands upon the head of his offering and slaughter it before the tent of the meeting. And the sons of Aaron shall throw its blood upon the altar all around. From the peace offering, he shall offer as a fire offering to Hashem its choicest part, the entire tail. He shall remove it above the kidneys and the fat that covers the innards and all the fat that is upon the innards, and the two kidneys and the fat that is upon them, that is upon the flanks. And he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver, with the kidneys. The Cohen shall cause it to go up in a smoke on the altar. It is the food of the fire for Hashem.
Thank you so much, Paul. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. And if his offering is a goat, he shall bring it before the Adonai and lay his hand upon its head. It shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. He shall then present as his offering from it, as an offering by fire to Adonai. The fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, the two kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. The priest shall turn these into smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire of pleasing odor. All fat is Adonai's. It is a law for all time throughout the ages. In all your settlements, you must not eat any fat or any blood.
Thank you so much, Jim. Steve, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 4?
Rabbi, the Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of the Eternal's commandments about things not to be done, and does one of them, if it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the herd without blemish as a purgation offering to the Eternal. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Eternal and lay a hand upon the head of the bull. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Eternal, and the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before the Eternal in front of the curtain of the shrine. The priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of aromatic incense, which is in the tent of meeting before the Eternal, and all the rest of the bull's blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all the fat from the bowl of purgation offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is about the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys, just as it is removed from the ox of the sacrifice of well-being. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar of burnt offering. But the hide of the bull and all its flesh, as well as its head and legs, its entrails and its dung, all the rest of the bull he shall carry to a pure place outside the camp, to the ash heap, and burn it up in a wood fire. It shall be burned on the ash heap.
Thank you so much, Steve. Dave, Levi, would you like to read starting at verse 13?
Sure. If it is the community leadership of Israel that has erred, and the matter escapes the notice of the congregation, so that they do any of the things which by Adonai's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize guilt, when the sin through which they incurred the guilt becomes known, the congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before Adonai, and the bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai. The anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before Adonai in front of the curtain. Some of the blood he shall put on the horns of the altar, which is before Adonai in the tent of meeting, and all the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all its fat from it and return it to the smoke on the altar. He shall do with his bull just as is done with the priest bull of the sin offering. He shall do the same with it. Priest shall thus make expiation for them, and they shall be forgiven. He shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he had burned the first bull. It is the sin offering of the congregation.
Thank you so much. And then Robert, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 22?
Yes, thank you. When a ruler hath sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord his God concerning things which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin wherein he hath sinned come to his knowledge, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hands upon the head of the goat and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out his blood at the bottom of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all his fat upon the altar as the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him.
Thank you so much, Robert. David and Susan, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 27?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. And if a single person from the common people should offend errantly in doing one of the Eternal's commands that should not be done, and bear guilt, or his offense that he committed is made known to him, he shall bring his offering, an unblemished female goat, for his offense which he committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the offense offering and slaughter the offense offering in the place of the burnt offering. And the priest shall take from its blood on his finger and place it on the horns of the burnt offering altar. And he shall pour out all its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall take away, as the fat was taken away from the communion sacrifice. And the priest shall turn it to smoke on the altar as a fragrant odor to the Eternal. And the priest shall atone for him, and it shall be forgiven him.
And if he will bring a lamb as his offering for a sin offering, he shall bring a female, unblemished. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it as a sin offering at the place where he would slaughter a burnt offering. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall spill all its blood at the base of the altar. And he shall take away all of its fat as the sheep's fat was taken away from the peace offering sacrifice. And the priest shall burn them to smoke at the altar with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's offerings by fire. And the priest shall make atonement over him and over his sin that he committed, and it will be forgiven for him.
Thank you so much, both of you. And Justin, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at the very start of chapter 5?
If a person sins, whereby he accepts an oath, and he is witness into some manner by seeing or knowing it, yet does not testify, he shall bear his transgression. Or if a person touches anything unclean, whether it is a carcass, an unclean wild animal, or the carcass of an unclean domestic animal, or the carcass of an unclean creeping animal, it was hidden from him, he incurs guilt. Or if he touches the uncleanness of a human with any uncleanness, through which he may become defiled, and it is hidden from him, and later he knows he has incurred guilt. Or if he touches the let's see, or if a person swears expressing with his lips to do harm or to do good, whatever a man may express in an oath and it is hidden from him, and later he knows, he's guilty in any one of these cases. And it shall be, when someone incurs guilt in any one of these cases, that he shall confess the sin which he had committed. And he shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord for his sin which he had committed, a female animal from the flock, either of sheep or a goat, for a sin offering. And the Cohen shall make atonement from his sin.
Thank you so much. And let me invite Catherine. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. But if his means do not suffice for a sheep, he shall bring to Adonai as his penalty for that of which he is guilty 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. He shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer first the one for the sin offering, pinching its head at the nape without severing it. He shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and what remains of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. And the second he shall prepare as a burnt offering according to regulation. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for the sin of which he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And Jay, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 11?
Thank you, Rabbi. Verse 11. And if his means do not suffice for 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, he shall bring as his offering for that of which he is guilty 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a sin offering. He shall not add oil to it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. He shall bring it to the priest, and if the priest shall scoop out of it a handful as a token portion of it and turn it into smoke on the altar with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's offering by fire, it is a sin offering. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for whichever of these sins he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven. It shall belong to the priest like the meal offering. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a person commits a trespass, being unwittingly remiss about any of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's sacred things, he shall bring as his penalty to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh a ram without blemish from the flock, convertible into payment in silver by the sanctuary weight as a guilt offering. He shall make restitution for that wherein he was remiss about the sacred things, and he shall add a 5th part to it and give it to the priest. The priest shall make expiation on his behalf with the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven.
Thank you, Jay. Verse 17. And when a person, without knowing it, sins in regard to any of Adonai's commandments about things not to be done, and then realizes his guilt, he shall be subject to punishment. He shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock, or the equivalent, as a guilt offering. The priest shall make expiation on his behalf for the error that he committed unwittingly, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He has incurred guilt before Adonai. Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 20?
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord by dealing deceitfully with his fellow in the manner of a deposit or an investment, or through robbery, or if he has intimidated his fellow, or if he has found something lost and lied about it and sworn falsely, any one of the various things that one may do and sin thereby, when one has thus sinned and realizing his guilt, would restore that which he got through robbery or intimidation, or the deposit that was entrusted to him, or the lost thing that he found for anything about which he swore falsely, he shall repay the principal amount and add a 5th part to it. He shall pay to the owner when he realizes his guilt. Then he shall bring it to the priest as his penalty to the Lord, a ram without blemish from the flock, or the equivalent as a guilt offering. The priest shall make expiation on his behalf before Adonai, and he shall be forgiven for whatever he may have done to draw blame thereby.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a bit of focused study, and then we'll have our collaborative conversation about it. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this moment. And our point of entry into the written text of this week's Torah portion is a painting by the Irish-British artist Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was born in 1909 and died in 1992. And he actually became a painter, well, relatively late in life, probably about the time he was 30 or so. And what Francis Bacon is most known for, perhaps, is his portrayal of what he called the brutality of fact. And he was, in a sense, a rather bleak chronicler of the human condition. And many of his works consist of biomorphic forms, that is, human beings, but also in the form of some kind of an animal. And often the expressions will be expressions of cries of terror or fear or ferocity. And I find them quite difficult to look at, quite disturbing, this combination of human and animal. But this is what Francis Bacon was addressing, his sense of how close we are to that animalistic nature of ourselves. And in this particular painting, which in fact is perhaps one of the tamer of his paintings that I've been looking at, it's called Study for a Bullfight #1. And of course, in the center, we have this mass that one can perhaps discern two figures there, one the bull and the other the one fighting the bull, the matador. But you'll notice that there's a lot of blurring between these two entities. And in fact, it appears that the face, the figure, the visage of the human being is quite blurred. You don't see any details as to that individual's face. And there's a deep engagement here, a connection physically between the bull and the human being. He did a series of these, and this one in particular, this Study for Bullfight #1, while on the one hand, it's dealing with this theme of man and beast, and where does one begin and another end, and this clash and fusion perhaps between the two. What I actually found more disturbing is what's happening in the background, because what's happening in the background is this is part of the spectators, is just a bit of sliver of what would normally be wrapped around the entire arena here. But here is just a sliver of the arena, and you can see in it this crowd of people who are watching this event. And to me, my reaction to the painting is I'm more frightened by the spectators, because they seem to be thriving on this encounter between man and beast. And then, if you'll notice, slightly elevated above the heads of the crowd, you see that shape that's in red there. And then it's being, on top of that shape, it seems to be carried by some bird of prey. Perhaps it's an eagle, not quite clear to me. Some people have speculated that that's meant to be some kind of allusion to a Nazi symbol. And so you've got this crowd that's being caught up in this encounter between man and beast, and they are not part of this encounter. They are spectators to it, and they seem to be more enwrapped, more, perhaps in some ways, more ferocious, if you will, than what's happening within the center of the ring. And so that may be what Francis Bacon is commenting on in terms of sometimes what happens when we detach ourselves from the engagement in self and we just become mere spectators. We become allowing ourselves to live through this encounter and allow ourselves to spill out our sense of ferocity. Whereas in the center of the ring, there's an engagement, and who knows what kind of new, what may emerge out of this encounter. There's an interesting connection between Francis Bacon and much of his work and what's happening in our world today, because a lot of his images are of these figures with this terrible recurring motif of a screaming mouth. And the screaming mouth motif that occurs in many of his works is based upon a photograph that he kept in his studio. And it's a still photograph taken from a movie. And that movie is the battleship Potemkin by Sergei Einstein. And there's a scene that occurs in that movie. Well, first of all, just to bring back to mind the nature of that movie, the battleship Potemkin. So it's about an incident that occurred in 1905 where the Tsarist Navy has a ship that's coming in to put down a rebellious riot among the people in Odessa. And then the sailors on board the ship mutiny. And they want to be part of the rebellion. They no longer want to fight for the Tsar. And some of the people in Odessa get into their ships and they go sailing out to cheer on the mutiny by the sailors. And then there is this moment in the movie when Cossack soldiers dismount and they come sweeping down the steps of Odessa, and they begin slaughtering all these innocent civilians who are there watching what's happening out at sea. And there's this one clip, this one moment in that film where I believe it's a nurse and her face just becomes splattered with blood, her eyeglass becomes shattered and broken, and she lets out this ferocious scream of horror and pain. And it's that photograph that Francis Bacon kept in his studio and turned to again and again to capture in his paintings that primal scream of horror over the bestiality that had been unleashed by the Cossacks on the steppes of Odessa in 1905. And in his mind, I'm sure, was being unleashed yet again and again and again. So I've entitled this week's Torah portion, The Beast Within, because I want to look carefully at what sometimes we can read this book of Leviticus and imagine what we're reading here is something so foreign to us. The sacrificial ritual where the priest would take an animal and kill it and place it on the altar. And this year, when I was reading this, I was thinking more about the entire flow of Torah, where we began in the book of Genesis with the beginning of everything and the tales of individual ancestors and their trials and tribulations and their struggles with their own character faults and so forth. And then we get to the book of Exodus, which then shifts to the entire people of Israel and their liberation from Egypt. And much of the theme about the rest of the book of Exodus after their moment in Egypt itself is the extent to which the people of Israel carry Egypt with them and continue to be flawed characters. And so some of the practice that we see in terms of the garments and the Mishkan that was being built was intended, I think, to be a way of starting to create some kind of practices that would cause people to realize the extent to which they can never get close to God, much less close to one another, to the extent that they remain enslaved within themselves. And they needed to have some kind of practices that as a people would allow them to emerge free of that enslavement. And then we make this radical shift from this grand story about liberation to this story that seems so foreign to us, and perhaps we react in horror to this notion of the killing of animals. And I thought, what's it got to do here? And this year I thought, no, what's happening here is it's now a return, if you will, back to the self. This is a chapter that is now once again trying to create some kind of practice that will allow the individual human being to transcend these lower levels of existence in order to elevate themselves, so that one can create the kind of community that can live in a land of promise and opportunity and mutuality. So that's why I want to focus on the very beginning of our portion here. In chapter 1 and verse 2, we have this verse that is translated in my edition as, when any of you presents an offering to God, and then begins to describe exactly what should be offered up, in this case, a cattle. And so I want to take a look at what Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who is the founder of the Lubavitcher movement within Hasidic Judaism, which eventually becomes known as Chabad. And we're going to see how closely Rabbi Shneur Zalman reads the Hebrew, reads the actual construct of the verse, and looks at the order of the words and comes up with something quite radical. Each of us has two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul. The essential purpose of our lives is to enable the godly soul to prevail over the tendencies of the animal soul. Even the animal soul shares in a love of God, as the Shema states, when a human being from among you will bring. The syntax reveals a deeper meaning. When a human being will bring from among you. And what is the offering we are to bring? It is from our animal soul. So here's what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is doing. He's looking at the Hebrew, which I've provided to you. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban ladonai. And he notices Adam, when a person, ki yakriv, brings mikem, from among you, a korban, an offering to God. And so Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, what it's really saying is we are instructed to bring something of ourselves, from out of ourselves, not from our herds, but from ourself. So this notion that what we're to bring is draw out of ourselves that animalistic dimension within us and offer that up, to cause it, to render it into something that is mere smoke, no longer something that is substantially present in our lives, but something that has now become turned into something much more insubstantial. This notion about, which is a classic Hasidic reading of a text, which is to turn from the external world and look at the internal world, and to view that the internal world is really the battleground for the making the world holy. And this notion about turning to the internal world is something that was transformed by another learned Jewish man into a whole system of dealing with the human interior life, and that is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, perhaps you know, came from a very rich Jewish and religious background. He had rabbis on both his maternal and paternal side. he was quite familiar and quite steeped within the Hasidic world, the Hasidic view of things. And indeed, in 1903, Sigmund Freud treated the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, who came to him for assistance. So he is very familiar with this outlook. And so let me just share with you what he wrote, what Sigmund Freud wrote in Totem and Taboo. Sublimation of instinct is an especially conspicuous feature of cultural development. It is what makes it possible for higher psychical activities, scientific, artistic, or ideological, to play such an important part in civilized life. Whatever we may think of Sigmund Freud's particular protocols and approaches and so forth, what's fascinating to me is that he's continuing this notion that what's happening here, perhaps in the book of Leviticus, which is what Rabbi Shneur Zalman points out, is it's not something that's taking place in the outside world. It's describing something that's taking place on the inside world. The need to, if you will, in Freud's terms, sublimate that part of ourselves, which otherwise would wreak havoc on ourselves and the world around us. For those who'd like to perhaps delve a little bit more deeply into Sigmund Freud's connection with the Hasidic world, you might take a look at a book called The Hidden Freud, His Hasidic Roots by Joseph Berg. But let me share with you, if you turn over, I'd like to share with you a poem by Nick Lowe. The beast in me is caged by frail and fragile bars, restless by day and by night rants and rages at the stars. God help the beast in me. The beast in me has had to learn to live with pain and how to shelter from the rain, and in the twinkling of an eye might have to be restrained. God help the beast in me. Sometimes it tries to kid me that it's just a teddy bear, or even somehow manage to vanish in the air. Then that is when I must beware of the beast in me that everybody knows. They've seen him out dressed in my clothes, patently unclear if it's New York or New Year. God help the beast in me, the beast in me. Nick Lowe, who is a British musician, was married to Carleen Carter, who was the stepdaughter of Johnny Cash. And Johnny Cash and Nick Lowe, even after Nick Lowe divorced Carleen Carter, they remained good friends and shared their musical work with one another. And one piece that Nick Lowe was working on for years to try and get it down just right was this song, The Beast in Me. And before Nick Lowe even had a chance eventually to record it himself, Johnny Cash was so taken by it that he recorded it first on one of his albums. I encourage you to listen to a recording of Johnny Cash singing this song. In fact, I'll post one on our Facebook page tomorrow. But when one hears Johnny Cash singing this song, you hear the pathos in it because he is living this out. As you may know, Johnny Cash was plagued by all kinds of addictions to alcohol, amphetamines, barbiturates. He would be able to sometimes become clean and sober, and then he would just have relapses and go back to using. And it was something that was quite destructive, both to him personally and to his loved ones around him. He said at one point, I was taking the pills for a while, and then the pills started taking me. When one hears Johnny Cash sing this song, you have a sense, a mixture of both menace and vulnerability. This is a man who's expressing through this song and his own voice how destructive he knows he can be. And yet he opens himself up to wanting to be better and transcend this moment. So I want to suggest that in our painting, in our song, and in our text, what we're dealing with is a recognition of how destructive some tendencies within us are, and the need to have some kind of practice, whether it's spiritual or therapeutic, to try and tame that beast and sublimate it for a higher purpose. And with that, I'd love to open it up and hear what else, in addition, people have seen, have heard, read within this week's Torah portion. So go ahead, David.
I just want to react to your teaching and say that there's an implication here that sublimation, control, somehow suppression of the animal inside of us is what our goal should be. But it's absolutely necessary to integrate it into ourselves, to somehow recognize that it is us. It's not something that we're not because we pushed it off and away. It's, I don't think, possible to get to a healthy state of mind if you suppress. So I don't know what Freud's talking about in sublimation, but I think it's really important to add that some of the most violent people, mass murders, et cetera, are people who have suppressed the side of themselves.
Thank you, David. I totally agree with you. And I'm sorry if any of the words or imagery that I used was indicating a suppression rather than an elevation, a transformation, which requires a recognition of that tendency, and then a practice that allows us to turn those urges into a more positive force in our lives. So thank you for pointing that out. Let me call Susan and then Mark Thompson. Yeah.
So I'm really struck with this painting. It's I can't make it out to some extent, but to what I can, there's blood both with the bull and on the man, and there seems to be something like maybe a cape or something that's full of blood in the forefront. But then in the back, where it's the maddening crowd, it's pure white. And it's really striking how, what that says to me is just deeply disturbing.
Thank you, Susan. I'm disturbed as well. Thank you. And then Mark Thompson, and then Justin and Catherine. Yeah.
Yes, Rabbi, unless I'm missing something, it seems that most of the sins described in this Torah portion are sins of omission, which I consider to be lapses of mindfulness, as opposed to sins of commission, an intentional violation of law or human decency. But they seem to be treated equally in terms of the expiation, in terms of the what people need to do in order to fulfill, to be absolved of their sins. So I have two questions. Number one, should we be more lenient of others and of ourselves, for that matter, for committing sins of omission as opposed to sins of commission? And secondly, following up what David was saying, are there not times when the beast must be summoned and not sublimated in order to defeat an even greater evil?
Well, for that last part, your last point is obviously profound and troubling, but it is a very profound question. Let me get to your first part, which is what this process is describing is what to do if you have done something without intentionally meaning to do something wrong. Okay, so
that's a sin of omission.
Well, you can say it that way. This has to do with the level of intent. I would say. Yeah. Okay. And for if you intend to hurt someone, if you intend to steal, that's a different process. This is
Right.
dealing with the capacity to repair for having done something that was a violation, not realizing it was a violation, and then you, oh my gosh, what did I do? And so there are moments to repair that distance that you've traveled, to close that gap that you've traveled as a result of having unintentionally caused some kind of violation. But your last point is certainly, that is a very profound question. Yeah. And so, but let me call upon Justin and Catherine. So Justin, you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, with regard to Freud, I mean, the sense that he was able to work with, you're saying with the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe is just such a fascinating piece to that. And I just, in sort of, and again, advocating for a psychoanalytic, the repression is happening in the normal course of the flow of libido in society. People have families, and there's repression that has to go on, but it's not been dealt with. And Freud was dealing with another one of his books, The Return of the Repressed, the fact that all of this stuff was coming up, and the only legitimate place to deal with it was in the analytic consulting room, because the rest of the place, it was toxic, and it remains toxic to deal with a lot of what is really repressed and sublimated. It'd be so much better if we didn't act it out as a war. And I mean, and the other piece here is that, to me, it's as though, I mean, because we're looking at such a critical origins of consciousness, I have this sense of, I mean, the total bereftness of the people of Israel in Egypt, that they I mean, just devastated by what had gone, abuse, trauma that had been going on at the hands of Pharaoh. And I mean, to enter into this sacrificial process is a meaning building process. It builds up meaning, as opposed to Shoah, or the unconsecrated slaughter that's going on in the Ukraine, which is slaughter. It's not, it's not sacred. So this other piece, and yes, it's really I mean, this is a shamanic chapter. This is talking about dismemberment that happens as we come into union with a deeper sense of meaning. That's the union of sense and nonsense. Whenever there's death like that, it's a deep chasm of nonsense, but that's what the priest is holding together. It's not held together when it's meaningless slaughter. And Bacon, and those images from Bacon, which are very profound, and from Potemkin, were pointing back to the issue of the slaughter, the Shoah.
Wow. Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much. Well, and Catherine, please share with us. And go ahead and unmute, Catherine.
Yes, I wanted to focus on the word you used in relationship to Johnny Cash, vulnerability, because I was struck by the vulnerability of the human figure inside the bull ring. And this idea that it's a very vulnerable moment when you confront your transgressions, but you must confront it. And so usually what we associate with the bullfighter is courage, but what we see here is vulnerability. And I was just really struck by that, and how that's what you're grappling with in the moment of having to make an offering.
Yeah. So the classic description of the bullfight, however, horrific we might, in our modern sensibilities, consider it, that the drama that's going on there is classically called death in the afternoon. And on the one sense, we know the bull is going to die, but it's also possible that someone else could die. And so it is this moment of mortality, and it is a bit of a drama, and it's a bit of drama that we might find repulsive, but to get at what is underlying that drama, it's more than bloodthirst. It is, as you were describing, kind of an exposure of oneself to this moment of what one's own fears and what the capacity to rise above one's own fears in a sense. Richard?
One thing is the bird,
A little louder.
the bird on the banner in the crowd.
Yeah.
You said perhaps an eagle. To me, it looks like a vulture. And sublimation and suppression are the opposite. Suppression or repression, it stays down there, dangerously ready to act out when it's triggered by some event. Sublimation is when it turns to smoke and is no longer viable as an active action, as active in the action. And what impresses me about this, most about this first chapter of Leviticus, we're moving beyond Exodus. There's something new going on here. And I think it's every instance when you've done a sin and it comes to your attention. That's what happens in psychotherapy. That's what happens as you age and look back and those things that you did and you realize, whoa, I really disrespected that person. And that's the time when you understand your intents and you take the whatever it is, the bull or the turtle dove, and it doesn't make any difference how big the animal is. It's the intent when you yourself are calling yourself out on something that you buried and repressed and are bringing it to sublimate, to change who you are so that you can go back into community and without judgment, without hostility, with the ability to be gentle, to create community. And that's the reason for the laws, not because you get punished if you don't do them, but because you start to recognize why they're there, and it changes your outlook. And that's what this is about, I believe. And it also reminds me a little bit of Jonah and so many cattle that everywhere the animals and the humans are all there to maybe be herded, maybe to come out and take dominion and make a nice world, but all working as one, as the Mishkan has to be knitted together, all these different pieces. And this is the continuance of that. And once we beyond the Exodus, then it's time to go back and look inside and discover that, wait a minute, I did that. I have to make expiation for that somehow. I have to bring that to the attention of my confessor or my therapist or my priest or my family and begin changing my attitude in those kinds of relationships.
Thank you so much, Richard. And let me call upon Robert, please. You'd like to unmute, yes.
Thank you so much. I always enjoy our conversations. Being a Baha'i, my perspective is similar but different. We believe we have one soul, but here's something I'd like to bring out. We have choice. There are circumstances where there are chemical issues that physicians have to figure out, but in the normal condition, we all have choice. And that choice is a struggle. That is the struggle of transformation. And I love it when you address this issue of transformation, because for Baha'is, this is first and foremost. First our own selves and then the world. And how do we change the world? Each one of us, pure and goodly deeds, seemly and commendable conduct, one heart at a time. What I appreciated out of this reading, especially tonight, was the discipline and the responsibility. God has spoken. I have blessed you. This is my understanding. There's a covenant. This is our covenant, and you obey. And when you obey, you are protected. But when you step out of that obedience, you're no longer protected. And I think that has been the way of religion and life forever, because when we step out of do unto others and to know and to love and to worship God, which, by the way, is, I believe, was one of the purposes of life, first and foremost, to love and to know and to worship God, then we have harmed ourselves. We have injured ourselves more than anyone else could ever injure us. because I've hurt my own soul. Mark is a dear friend. God forbid we ever hurt anybody, but if he hurt me, it wouldn't reduce my character. But if I do not discipline myself and desire to be godly, I will hurt myself, my soul. So with regard to the picture, I like it because to me, I'm glad you're smiling, because to me, it's obvious. It's an indictment of our times. You have these folks, and you notice the very thin screen showing how shallow they are, just like in the days of Rome. You know, they're happy and they love it. They don't have the courage to do anything. They're only watchers. I'm sorry, we see this in the world today. And then we see this show of pleasure, killing for pleasure. Well, no wonder it's very, I like it because I think it's an indictment of our times. And I think it's an honest showing of our lower nature and how in society, there's so few who will arise to do the right thing day after day, struggle after struggle, arise and struggle, versus just watch and go along. You know, Mark and I have had conversations for years, and I've shared with him, no matter what a person's belief, I respect it if it's genuine. But if it's just something they say, well, I believe without any deep roots, if they're not willing to live for it or die for it, I would question if it's belief. And that's what I see in that picture. I know I'm a passionate person, so you have to forgive me. This is just, it's just me. See what my wife has to live with. But I think that picture says so much.
Great. Thank you, Robert. That's very rich. Thank you. And Anna, did you want to share something? Yeah.
How big is this picture in real life?
I'm not sure.
When I look at this picture, my eye roves around and it got over to the right-hand side of the blue screen where the bottom, like the floor of the arena meets there. And to me, it looks like there's some kind of skeleton, like there's somebody that isn't even still alive, like there's some bones over there on that side. Anyway, I'd like to take a look at it closer. All the talk that we've done about bringing offerings for commission or omission sins in our life, it seems to me when you bring an offering or you want to make expiation, it's to bring about peace or to bring about some kind of wholeness. It's like where there's a separation from the beast within and the non-beast within. There's a reconciliation there that I think we're talking about, but we haven't talked about it. And all of the Torah portion that we've read, we've talked around it, but we haven't talked about how does it feel when you are able to make peace inside of yourself. How does it feel when you're able to make peace in your community or bring peace to your community? And to me, it seems like that's a big piece, the intimacy with God, with ourselves, to know ourselves, and with one another. It seems there's a whole blessing. I mean, that alone would be a reason to partake of some of these sort of gross offerings. But in the Torah here, it's like that part is, where is it? What is it? I mean, if you want to motivate me to do something, talk about love and closeness, right?
Well, so all this, the term that's used here is korban, or as it's used in the very opening of our verse here, Adam ki yakriv, which is here translated as presents, but the verb there, karav, is to bring close.
Oh, nice. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
So this is a process designed to close some terrible rending that has happened in some kind of relationship, to bring that back, reattaching, bringing it back into closeness.
Thank you.
Okay. And let me, what a rich conversation we've had tonight. I just want to share with you something I saw for the first time in all the many scores of times I've read this Torah portion. when the portion begins to talk about a process of expiation for when a transgression has been committed, it does so in a particular order. It starts with when the priest may have done something. So the priest is ostensibly the spiritual leader of the whole community. Then it says, oh, and if the whole community has done something. So now we're dealing with the body itself, the house itself, the whole community having done something. And then from there it goes a little bit lower in the scale of everything. And so, if it's a chieftain who has committed a transgression. So the chieftain being the head of a subpart of the whole community. And then it concludes with, and if any single person has done something. So to me, what that's saying is the community itself can't be healthy unless you start at the top, unless those who are leading are willing to recognize that they have committed some transgression. And that's the way a community is healthy, is when leadership at the top leads the way, not only in where to go, but in also in recognizing when they've made mistakes. I want to thank everyone for contributing to such a wonderful, rich conversation. I'm so grateful for all the contributions and our presence together. I learned so much. I look forward to our next session today. God bless you all. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.